SportsLit is co-founded and co-hosted by Neil Acharya and Nate Sager. Technical producer and engineer, Michael Ella. Executive producer, Neil Acharya.
Entrez-vous, s'il vous plaît, SportsLit listeners. We're in conversation today with Jason Kirk about his book, Hell is a World Without You, a novel which was released in February 2024 by Shutdown Full Books. You may know Jason Kirk as a senior editor at The Athletic, a co-founder of the Shutdown Fullcast podcast, and he's also done a great podcast he and his spouse, Emily Kirk, made called Vacation Bible School. Hell is a World Without You is his first book, and it does contain discussions of various forms of religious trauma, so know that going in, know that you're valued, know that you're loved, and we'll be talking to Jason shortly. Learning that Jason Kirk wrote a novel that dives into the effects of his evangelical upbringing, just set off some alarm bells. Like, we have to get him on the show on SportsLit. I think that comes from following what Jason does as a national level college football journalist. He's an editor at The Athletic and one of the mirth makers over at the Shutdown Fullcast. Whenever someone from that crew does something, you know that there's some deep thought and some heart and just a general frivolity behind it. Now, fare thee warned, Hell is a World Without You, a novel, has lots of good laughs, but it has also some serious takes on, high control religion. It's not about sports. It's by someone labeled a sports journalist, highlighting with empathy the traumas that can come from growing up in a, sort of a fundamentalist religious environment. There's definitely politics in that, but for us as a podcast, it's all about a good book and a good guest. As a listener of Shutdown Fullcast, my week isn't complete until I've heard it. I mean, listen to, Jason Kirk plus Holly Anderson, Spencer Hall, Ryan Nanny, and Michael Serber. I'm a full-on fanboy. What I love is that they build in good works into, fan service. With the pre-order for this debut novel, Kirk and his readers raised over $50,000 US for the Trevor Project, a nonprofit dedicated to LGBTQ, 2SIA+, and questioning youth, developing suicide prevention supports because they're in a more high-risk group than other young people. That definitely hit home with some things we've had in Hamilton. Now, plot summary-wise, Hell is a World Without You follows Isaac Siena Jr., the youngest son of a widowed mother, from just before his 14th birthday till his 18th during the early 2000s. It really is. That was 20 years ago. Hard to believe, eh? Isaac and his youth group, Sophie, Alexa, Josiah, and a cadre of Calebs, they all contend with all the teenage rebellion impulsivity you and I had. But as evangelical kids, their emotive wiring also brings in this constant pressure from what Isaac calls this facsimile world designed to consume the original. And Kirk is very particular about, what it takes to sort of be credible for other people who were raised in, an evangelical household and are an evangelical, church community. On the surface level, I guess it's a space where at that time, quote, most youth pastors dress like Stifler. To someone who's not from it, the best way I can analogize, imagine if life is just one continuous hockey game, but you don't know if you're onside or offside since they move the blue line to a different spot every day. It's a lot. That's a lot. And that time in your life is a lot, no matter, what, your tertiary or secondary shadings are. Isaac Siena describes growing up with the reality of being, quote, too young for penny contracts with Columbia Record Club, but old enough for eternal contracts with the omnipotent. That piqued me as a reader because that sort of evangelical Christian culture. It was definitely around during the first 2 decades I was alive, and in the part of Canada where I was raised. But Dan Sager and Kathy Sager, my parents just politely said, no, that's not for our kids. And I thank them for it. And I think it ties into just doing things in a mentally healthful way, which is one of our hobby horses. Think of our recent episode with The Price She Pays authors Katie Steele and Dr. Tiffany Brown. Their book actually gets a little into the absurdities of the NCAA, which Jason Kirk knows more than a little about. Hearing Facsimile World also makes me think of, 16 and 17-year-old boys have to go out and be in the pro hockey players in the Canadian Hockey League. And over at sportslit.ca, we've had a few guests who've done that. You can find who've done that. May 2023, Justin Davis, Conflicted Scars. October 2022, Corey Hirsch, The Save of My Life. Back to March 2021, Brant Myers, Painkiller. Commonality with all of them is like, hey, hockey saved me at various times, but, there were these jagged edges in the psyche that got sharpened, brought to sharp points by playing in this sort of, like I say, high control world. Now, I've read Styles of the World Without You 3 times since I bought the pre-order in the last winter. Doing this episode was a way to sort of get the word out. I know that one of the things Jason really wants to do is get more copies in libraries, and that was near and dear because we started recording SportsLit in a city library. We need public libraries, man. I guess the other motivator was just brain candy. I get to talk to Jason Kirk, who covers college football, my favorite sport in terms of the amount of hours I spend watching it. He edits Until Saturday, the New York Times college football newsletter. And my Shutdown Fullcast is just mana when they post every Wednesday, and when they go live for Fullcast After Dark on Saturdays after 12 hours of college football games. They just riff to daylight until they hit comic pay dirt. Anyone that says Conversations of Dying Art, no, just listen to Jason and Holly, Spencer, Ryan, Michael Serber. And you don't need to be a big college football fan to watch it. As long as you sort of have a rough idea of who's where in the AP Top 25 and who's the big games that are going to be on TV the weekend upcoming, you're ready to laugh. And don't necessarily listen to it when you're at the gym and you're moving around heavy weights. If my ankles could talk, they would be screaming in pain because, they might have had a 44-pound kettlebell dropped on them because I was laughing too hard. So I just wanted to thought, we don't necessarily do college football books specifically, but this is an interesting year for college football. All the realignments that are sort of dictated by TV, and then the college football playoff goes from 4 teams to 12, and maybe we'll get a game played in a giant snow globe on December 20th. The timing felt right. And I don't think I'm alone in being a Canadian who gets more emotionally wrapped up in college football Saturdays than NFL Sundays. And the funny thing is, my college football explainer was a Canadian, Scottish-coded, resolutely Canadian, secretly feminist, powerhouse Queen's Golden Gales team circa 1988 to 92. I'm not going to belabor, but it is relevant to this podcast because the first time Neil Acharya and I worked together was me helping him out when he was the commentator and on-site producer for Gales football on CFRC 109 FM in Kingston. We both knew that this was a team that had won a national title because we'd both gone to high school in the area. So, I will ask Jason how he got into college football, but I got into it because we had this sort of like scale model of it. And my mom was going to Queens as a mature student back then. And the first professor she had was the great legendary history professor, Jeff Smith. And to his final days in 2021, Jeff was the Gales hype man. And I think one Saturday, my mom put the game on the radio, and my dad had hooked up. He had, wired in this, high fidelity, stereo system so we could have the sound, of the game going throughout the house. In some way, they were just thinking, how do we cheer up this ginger mope we have down in the back bedroom? And maybe it was just the way that another CFRC crew was just living and dying with every play, the way the roars and the moans of the crowd came through the hi-fi speakers that Dan Sager had installed. Now, the funny part is Bishops won the game, but Queens won an introverted super fan. Now, I didn't know all the history of the team at that time, but, I got it in pieces thanks to the fact that there were good local stories or tellers around like Claude Skilly, the Week Standard, and Mike Postovit on CKWS TV. I soon learned that actually Queens is still the only Canadian team to ever have a player go in the first round of the NFL draft. Mike Shadd to the Rams in 1986. And I don't know how this all connects, but that was the same month that 3/5 of the tragically hip Gord Downey, Rob Baker, Gord Sinclair all completed their degrees at Queens. I know that ties together because another member of the band, Paul Langlois, his dad, Dick Langlois, coached high school football at Kingston Collegiate across the street from Queens. And if you read Tick's obit from this summer, he felt anything worth doing right and worth doing well must also be fun. And yeah, he was a Queens guy. So if you'd like to notice little things, in one of the first publicity shots the band posed for after they signed with a record label that year, Paul Langlois was wearing his high school football jacket, the Kingston Blues, and he's got jersey number 69 on the sleeve. So basically, yeah, Paul Langlois was Shoresy, just in a different sport, by the shores of Lake Ontario, and his dad was from Northern Ontario. Anyway, I'm just saying, I had Queens as my football lab. To this day, the Vikings give up a long pass play, and I'll be like, add pressure, not coverage, which I know comes straight from Bob Mullen, who was the only D coordinator whose unit fully, completely pitched a shutout in the Vanier Cup. And all the sort of pageantry that Queens had in the tradition, it helped me understand, okay, that's why Michigan wears those helmets. That's why these teams have names like Crimson Tide and Cornhuskers, or why, some of them run out on the field behind a 1,200-pound buffalo. It's also why the less resources, less brawny teams, run the triple option or the air raid. And in the present, it's why the Vanderbilt fans tore down the goalposts. But again, we are focusing mostly on Jason's novel, and it's about, just pushing back on high control and just sort of finding, defining your own spirituality. I related it a lot to the actor Rainn Wilson's book, Soul Boom, that I read in 2023 during a trip to Iceland. It's a lot to think about, across at least 300 pages, plus more, depending on where Jason Kirk takes this, fictional universe next. We're going to talk to him right after the break. And again, be sure to visit sportslit.ca for our whole catalog and a link to buy this book and all the other books we featured over the last 7 years. Well, Jason Kirk, welcome to SportsLit, and just congrats on how this debut novel has found a great audience. I just wanted to ask, though, since I am in Canada and I have to ask the hockey question, I won't feel comfortable. Why were there all these references to the Buffalo Sabres in Isaac Siena's teenage life?
So that came about because when I originally first started writing it, sent around the first few drafts or whatever, it was set in sort of a very vague Anytown, USA, where it was like, all right, it's clearly set in the 2000s. It's clearly set within a certain kind of church. But I just didn't really care about the geography of it. And I got a couple notes from readers that were like, you're really vague about where in Georgia this is set. And I'm like, hang on, I didn't say anything about this being set in Georgia or the South or any, it was just this, perhaps naturally, I guess, some readers sort of view fiction through the prism of the author in some ways. So I think they assumed that since I'm from Atlanta, that my characters are from Atlanta, and that wanted to even imply. And in fact, I kind of wanted to get at the opposite. Like I kind of wanted to show that, like, no, this isn't, extreme religious indoctrination is not just a, Southern American thing. It's not a Southern Baptist thing. It's not a Protestant thing. It's not an American thing. It's not a modern thing. It's a thing, right? It's a thing people have been doing for thousands of years, throughout Western Christianity and beyond. So there is no way I could say this is not set in the South unless I specifically placed it somewhere else. And I thought about a variety of purple states. I thought about Colorado, Michigan, Southern California, which is, we think of California as a monolith, but, sort of one of the themes of the book is that nowhere is a monolith.
Yeah.
So, Southern California has a lot of conservative areas. Settled on Pennsylvania for a variety of reasons. One being my family, which both sides of my family go back to Scotland. We immigrated to one side of the family pretty much came straight to the south, but another went basically from Scotland to right around where you are, to Buffalo, to Pennsylvania, and then made their way down to Atlanta. So I found that Pennsylvania had some personal connections for me, and I eventually found that the couple of characters who have ties to Buffalo, who, they're like the pastor's son and niece, have ties to Buffalo. They moved to the book's setting after being born in Buffalo, but they remain Bills and Sabres fans. So yeah, and it ended up being a thing where once our protagonist begins dating one of those kids, he's suddenly finds himself really leaning hard on his Buffalo Sabres trivia knowledge when it's time to impress the parents. I don't show a lot of that. It's just sort of it's a line or two just mentioned, but yeah.
I was I feel like there's a good story about why he picked the Sabres, and let's just use that as our sort of lead off warm up question, since the Sabres are the most accessible NHL team for me as a modest income Hamilton, Ontario resident, just an hour away, and an hour and a valid passport away, and obviously much better price points than the hockey team in Toronto that plays in insert name of bank here arena. So how much is the theme of this really about the value of someone finding what they really care about in their deep, heartfelt religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs versus, I think, what you've termed high control religion, and it's something that has a universality to it, and I think it comes back to the sports world a little too.
Yeah, there was, when I first started setting out to write this, I didn't really know where it was going to end up, but one of the driving impulses that, looking back, is now very clear. One of the driving impulses was I wanted to show how complex it is actually inside this world that a lot of people don't know a lot about. Everyone knows the influence that white evangelicalism has over conservative politics. In America especially, but not just America. But it often completely is missed what it's like to grow up within that, and why those people become the way they are, and how hard it is to break away from it. And there's this weird thing where a lot of people who leave that world just do not ever talk about it ever again, especially not in general population. So I wanted to show that hey, me and my friends, when we were in that world, we were every bit as rebellious and, adventurous and so on and so forth as any other group of kids, while also having this constant fear of hell and shame and damnation and so on and so forth hanging over us at all times. So I wanted that juxtaposition and that contrast. And I guess the more I kept going, the more it was a process of me realizing that I had never actually taken apart the the beliefs that have been instilled in me. I didn't vote like those people anymore, and I didn't go to their buildings anymore. But I had never actually replaced in my brain the things that I had to get rid of while leaving the church all those years ago. So the process of writing it was a process of finally reckoning with all that scaffolding of my brain. And a thing I've heard since it's come out, I've heard that a lot of people have kind of the same thing going on, where you leave that high control environment where, it's funny, me and my wife a year or two ago, we found this did you grow up in a cult test online written by a professor who's a cult researcher, and it's haha LOL, out of these it's 50 boxes. I'm I bet I'll check a few, and it's you look up and it's wow, almost all of them. That's bad. That's pretty bad, and I went to a church that most people would recognize as just the church down the street. And I've heard from a lot of people who had pretty similar upbringings and then just never talked about it ever again. And I've also heard, from a lot of people who grew up completely differently who say like, maybe I've heard from people who grew up, atheists in Massachusetts or whatever. And they'll say a lot of this rang like weirdly familiar. And like, which kind of gets to my point that all this stuff, systems of control, that benefit the people in charge, that stuff is universal one way or the other.
Yeah, true.
So
I kind of was like, I grew up with this kind of around me because I'm from a rural area in southeast Ontario where I think at one point the township had the densest concentration of Methodists in Ontario, just weirdly 70% Methodists until well into the probably just around the time I came in the world, and it's just and you're like, yeah, there were kids at my public high school who gathered at the flagpole to pray, but there were like 6 of them in a school of 750. And everything with the church that some of my extended family attended and some of the things they would say at like family gatherings. And I'm just like, what? Where are you getting this? And my parents kind of shielding us from that. But at the same time, this is a book that's, I think at the end, as we follow Isaac and his youth group and his friends, Alexa and Sophie and Josiah, I mean, their faith is what gets them through it, is something I think that needs to be highlighted, right?
in a lot of ways, yeah. And I mean, community definitely gets them through. Like it's clear these kids need each other, and not just the kids, the grown-ups as well. But like, it's one part community. It's a world that teaches you in a way to just dump your heart all over the place, and like at times it aims to have you do that in service of, conservative politics or whatever. But, if you have a group of friends and you are told it is good for, all of you to go stand under the moon and sing to the heavens all night long, you're going to develop some pretty tight emotional bonds. Then what happens when those bonds, when some of you start to become interested in heterodox politics, or maybe some of you have different gender expressions, like once the complexity of life begins to reveal itself, if those bonds remain, then you have like some really powerful friendships that the institution can no longer control, right? Which is what I found in my life is like, I have, lifelong friends that I met when we were, creationist middle schoolers, and we've gone in a wide variety of directions, but like, we have outlasted our bonds have outlasted, the men who were in the roles when those bonds were formed. So like, yeah, the community is the main thing. And as far as like the specifically religious aspect of it, like I and several of my characters have sort of found a place where it's like, it's not really about the beliefs, and it's not about the being able to say that you think this or that thing literally happened, or this or that definition of the Trinity is correct or whatever, or, this church is right and that church is wrong. It's not really about that. Like the gospel is not contingent on being able to affirm a list of words that guys with big hats wrote down 1600 years ago, and said, this is Christianity, right? Like, in the epilogue at the end, like I don't really care about spoilers. I just sort of
it's out there. I'm assuming whoever listens has probably read the book or is planning to, or will find things along the way.
Like I've talked to several readers who like they've gone through a second time and they're like, oh, you kind of just spell everything out along the way. So like, yeah, I don't really care about spoilers. But like there are characters who end up with their own version of Christianity. There are characters who end up completely irreligious, and there are characters who end up somewhere in between. But like the ones who stick together are the ones who I would argue hew to what the gospel actually is, which is, solidarity, which is valuing the lowest ranked members of society, which is all that stuff, rather than, the things that we're taught religion is, even though the Bible itself spells out that like actual religion is, doing what you can to take care of poor people, not showing up at a certain time of day on Sunday and waving your hands correctly and all that stuff.
Yeah. And I wanted to circle back just to that bit about scaffolding, because I think the novel unfolds from 2000 to 2004. And well, maybe we'll just start there. That is a very rich vein to tap for what was going on in pop culture, and I think in politics in North America then. And we now have the remove of 15, 18, 20 years to sort of look back and go, well, that was weird.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. Like, I think, we grew up in the 90s, 2000s, whatever. We had like Nick at Night, where we're getting like 50s and 60s TV shows, and like that 70s show was a show that was coming out. It was like this constant wave of like, here is what things were like in previous decades. And then for whatever reason, that mostly just stopped, right? Like, there should be right now there should be a show called That 2000s Show, right? Like, if we were to if we were to maintain that same standard from what we grew up on, but for whatever reason, it's just less prevalent to think of the time in which I was an adolescent as a time that can be looked back on through that lens, so it felt, I don't want to say untapped, because obviously there's a lot of great stuff written about any time period, but like it felt like a playground that had not been thoroughly exhausted, to say the least. And that, that goes for like, there's pop culture stuff I tried to find a lot of meaning in. I didn't want to just reference stuff for the hell of it, but like, I the lists of video games in here, they're all specifically, diligently chosen for their thematic reasons.
Yeah, I was just like, I don't even think I'm going to be able to ask him about the video games, because I was the guy like, oh, video games, I just want to play Madden, okay? Because they didn't sell the NCAA video game in Canada till about 2008, so you had to basically make a special run to a Walmart across the border to get it. But yeah, that was what, I guess I just wanted to ask how much pertinence all this sort of it's kind of about organizational behavior, right? And sorting people into the in-group. And how much does that really have pertinence into what we sort of see in sports, where we want to be competitive, but we also don't want to go too far into hateful behaviors?
I have sort of come around to the theory that like every group of people is mostly the same functionally as like every other group of people. And I don't mean morally. Like, certainly there are some groups that, treat other people better than other groups do. I just mean like the groups that we are in, the things we call ourselves, the groups we identify with, over here are different from those people over there. We are better than them in this way, in this way, in this way. Like, that is how humans have operated forever, and it doesn't matter whether it's religion or sports or educational background or any possible group I can lay claim to that gives me the ability to say I am superior to someone I don't like. I am physically inclined toward accepting that and taking that and running with it, right? And in sports is probably the most honest version of this, right? Like, because every sports fan believes we are morally superior to the fans of our rival, and like, the fun thing is, if you cover a sport at a national level, like as most of my background is as a national college football editor, like, you see like, nah, man, y'all are all the same. And people fight this so hard. Like, oh, no, you don't understand. We are very different from that. And we are so very different from our rival. And in fact, we are more different from our rival than anyone else is from their rival. And it's like, no, you are 99% the same. I'm telling you, I see you interact. I see the things you say when you're not talking to them. So it's I guess it's a fun perspective, and it's not like a place of like elevated wisdom or whatever, because I am inclined toward that same thought as well. As an Atlanta Falcons fan, I have that same thought about New Orleans Saints fans until I remember, like, no, they think the same thing about me, right? So like, I guess applying that lesson from sports to religion, and seeing like, all right, there is an argument for having grace toward my younger self, because, anyone who was raised as I was raised would have had the same thoughts and beliefs as I did. They would have thought them as I did. They would have had their doubts and, arguments and rebellions and whatever. But there is not a kind of person that would have been put in that world that would have been, immune to propaganda.
And everyone thinks they are. Everyone thinks they're, I'm the one person advertising doesn't work on. I'm the one person propaganda doesn't work on. But, for the life of me, I also love a good ad. There used to be a furniture chain up in Canada called Leon's that used to have the most offbeat ads. And I'm looking up like super cuts of them. So clearly advertising worked on me.
Sure.
And I just, that you actually sort of twigged what I did want to ask. That scaffolding you talked about, like timeline-wise in your life, sort of how long did it take to sort of take everything that had been built up through this, early life, and then sort of take it down and build it back up to where you are now, where you feel like I read pretty much everything you put out, and it's just kind of like, this jives with how I feel about a lot of things, and just in terms of, help always having a hand up for and a hand out for someone.
It took a long time, and like I look back at my, like elementary school, middle school, I see parts falling away. Like there's a moment near the beginning where Sophie, the name she's going by at the time, tells a story of she read Jurassic Park when she's, supposed to be a little homeschool creationist, and it planted this little bit of curiosity in her, and like that is one of many, many moments that I am not inventing, because that was me. Like that was one of my first foothold. I have a Jurassic Park tattoo in the same place she ends up getting one, because like, because like that was one of my very first footholds toward curiosity away from certainty. But like, I look at just every stage of life, and it was, in high school, obviously, I wrote about high school for a lot of reasons. One being, for a lot of us, that is when this stuff really starts falling apart. You get a driver's license. Boom. You suddenly have access to all sorts of new ideas. College is when this stuff just really starts falling apart, often, a little bit too far. I was a little bit of a know-it-all, like agnostic in college. Nothing against agnostics at all, but that's where I was. And still, it's funny. Like I look back at that stage, when it was like, I don't ever go to church. I don't ever want to think about religion again. And I was anti-choice. I had, some like still like sexist things lingering in my head. There were like, I wasn't going around calling people names and whatever, but there were still bad ideas in my head that I thought I just deleted by simply not going to the building anymore. That wasn't the case at all. Like it all had to be uprooted bit by bit. And like, through my like 30s, it was just like, I don't ever think about religion, and then 2016 religion is like completely unavoidable forefront because of, evangelicals leading the conservative Christian charge toward Trump, and it's like, okay, so everyone seems really confused about why this is happening. It's like there was a lot of articles about like, why are Christians supporting this guy, and it just all came flooding back, and it's like, oh, I know, I could tell. Like, ask me anything you want to know, I know, So it just became unavoidable that like I was going to have to think about this stuff, and then really it was, talking about religion on the Fullcast, which it sounds weird probably to some people talking about religion on a college football podcast, but we go very off topic. And like, I noticed every time I talked about religion, people would respond either like, hey, you just unlocked a memory, or, oh, so that's why my weirdest neighbor is like that. And like, I liked both of those reactions and I wanted more of them, So then I started writing the novel. And now I look back and I see I started writing it in like 2019. In like a very weird, convoluted way. And then like, quarantine hit. And 2021, 22, I had lots of free time and spent all of them on this thing. And that was when truly I finally actually deconstructed my religion. Like all these years after I thought I did, just because I stopped attending. But that was when I finally uprooted the, toxic positivity and like, which was really the main biggest thing to go, which like, I there is a lot of like theatrical, dramatic fire and brimstone type stuff, and waving around guns. Yes, that was real. But like, that wasn't the stuff that hurt me the most. Like, I look back and it's insane and I don't really know how I survived it, but like, that wasn't the stuff that did the most lingering damage. It was just like the psychological, acceptance of burden and acceptance of failure, and like just like being okay with like it's just learning to get to a place where it's like the whole world is not counting on me being perfect every day, quite clearly, because that'd be pretty bad if it was. But just all that stuff that was done to rewire my brain as a young person, that's what took the longest to change. And writing this book ultimately is what did it. Not to say I'm done, but
no, I know, and I'm going to ask it because it feels like this is going to have spin-offs on top of spin-offs. It's almost like the novels is the base play in an RPO, so to speak. What struck me too, it's like I think one of the best things I ever got told, I think when I was young, was or in journalism schools, Nathan, perfection is the enemy of good, and it doesn't sound like that's something that Isaac and Sophie and Alexa were hearing too often, and sounds like something anyone in that world isn't hearing enough as a kid.
Yeah, it's more like perfection is the thing that must be strived for, but you cannot possibly do any of it on your own because you are miserable and disgusting and lowly and a worm. And so like it's a striving for perfection at the expense of yourself, right?
And putting that a teenager's world is kind of like it's a moving target kind of, every day. Like, who are my friends today? What's coming into my world, and then just put all that on top of it. It just seems torturous.
It's a lot.
Yeah, and like I say, and again, sports is in this. The socialization part of sports also is a big theme in the novel. I think, in terms of, you see Isaac, and I think you see his friends encounter it. Like, how much sports can I have in my life and still try to be this perfect person? That's something the book spends a lot of time with, eh?
Yeah, I'd say so. Like it, coming into it, there was this sort of tightrope thing where it was like, I know a lot of the readers are going to be people who, who have read my sports writing or listen to the podcast, so they're going to be sports-minded people. And it was like, I want to use that to the book's advantage, that like sports literacy and sports familiarity. But at the same time, I don't want to be pigeonholed as like sports writer and like it's sports book, because it's not a sports book at all.
No, it's not.
So it's like, all right, scene one is pickup football game at church camp. The point isn't the pickup football game, but it's what they're doing, right? So it's sort of like football podcast listener, here we go. Here is your transition into this world is pick up football, right? And then after that, I just sort of tried to be honest with it. Like, what were they doing on this day, in history? Because like, that's the fun part of writing about like exact day by day, a real point of history is like, well, on this day, they would have been watching the Janet Jackson, I should say the Justin Timberlake Super Bowl. So of course, Justin Timberlake is to blame. And so, sports popped up in that way. And like, yeah, like they're playing video games. The video games are going to be playing Tony Hawk, of course. That's sports, So like, it was just sort of this, just being honest about what music are they listening to? What would they be doing on this day? It seems like he's the best player on the football team, even though he's the kicker. So like, of course, they're going to be hanging out at the stadium, working on their kicking and whatever. And I wanted all that stuff to just flow with the religious stuff. Like sometimes it's the church kids doing this stuff. Sometimes the church kids and the school kids are playing Madden together, and it's just a thing, and no one's making a big thing of it. So yeah, I guess sports felt like video games and scripture memorization and fast food. It just felt like one more way to show that like these are just normal kids in a weird world, and parts of normal world flow in and out of weird world just like everything else does.
Yeah, that character Amir, I loved. Did it actually? I've read the novel 3 times through, and I'm trying to remember. Does it actually mention where he actually goes off to play college football as a kicker? But he's a great character.
Youngstown State. He's a Penguin. I had Eastern Michigan for a while. I thought about a few others, but yeah, ended up going with Youngstown.
My godparents' daughter played soccer actually at Eastern Michigan, so they're a small world.
Yes.
Now, I do wonder, how are all these years as a sports journalist, how was it sort of training to know how to have the discipline to write a novel, Jason?
So it was fun. Like, Originally, my writing background is like creative writing. Funny enough, like, I wrote a lot of little stories and stuff as a kid, took creative writing classes in college, don't have a journalism degree. So journalism was sort of like my second phase as a writer, I guess. So for me, in some ways, it was going back, but going back with the, the tools and discipline I've gained, as a professional. There was a lot of stuff where I see it playing in. There are a couple chapters particularly that are like very world building heavy, which I base partly on like fantasy sci-fi novels where it's like we arrive at this new planet. Oh my gosh, the grass is orange, and where it's just like it's like a character explaining, here's how things work around here while trying not to make it a lore dump while actually trying to like be a character. And I did that about, this church environment because like a lot of readers have never been there. And also at the same time, just as importantly, a lot of readers did grow up there and they're going to be evaluating whether I am depicting it accurately or not, and like I have to show them quickly and constantly that like, yes, you are safe. I was there. I am not just doing this, to say you were a weird homeschool freak or whatever. Like, no, I am one of you, so like it was both those things at once. And having a journalism background, I think gave me a lot of tools that were beneficial there, especially in a chapter where it's like explaining how things work here. It honestly, and it's funny, people have told me this, that they picked up on the way I talk when I'm like explaining how the NCAA works feels similar to me explaining how a high control religious institution works, because there's a lot of just saying something that sounds legitimately crazy, but saying it with a straight face because it's true. So like finding a way to say, when you talk about the NCAA and you talk about, I think all the time about the times in history when an NCAA lawyer has stood in front of a judge, an actual grown-up judge who works for the real-life government, and has to explain like how March Madness works, and the judge is like, seriously?
Yeah.
And like there's so many examples of this going back decades, and it's like the fiction falls away, the self-mythologizing is exposed when you put something in just plain language, describe it as exactly as it is, and not unfairly, not making up stuff about it, just describing it as exactly as it is, but stripping it of its terminology. I tried to do a lot of that, There's like, the idea that Christianity is, just for example, the idea that Christianity is about like Jesus dying for your sins, as opposed to you have done things wrong and you should atone with the people you have wronged. And all of this is a process of all of us, making things right. The idea that Jesus was tortured because I have, done some little sin that didn't actually harm anyone. There's a line in there that's like, Jesus's rib meat was flayed because two teenagers did hand stuff at the putt-putt course 2,000 years later. That's ridiculous. That is completely absurd. But that is a logical conclusion of this atonement theory, that was like the point of Jesus's life and death was, if there had, I was told as a kid, if you had only done one sin, Jesus would have been tortured exactly as much for you because of that one sin. If there had only been one sin in the entire history of the world, Jesus would have had to die the exact same way. That's absurd. Like to tell a child that, like, oh, you thought about cheating on a test but didn't actually do it. Therefore, Jesus had to die. That's crazy, right?
It is.
So putting that in
that is so much to put on us like an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old child. Like,
yeah. So like, and it even beside like it just, minimizes the actual point of the mission and all that stuff. Just like take that and take it to its logical conclusion, put it in the barest, plainest language you can, and there is no way to argue, I have done anything unfair, I guess. So a lot of that came with covering the extremely absurd sport that is college football.
Yeah, and you've gotten to do it in an interesting time. Like I always think Charles Pierce is always like, the end of the NCAA is coming sooner than you think, and we're probably in the early stage and end of it, I think. Are we not?
Yeah, I mean, like getting to grow up in an institution that is doomed, no matter how omnipotent it is looked at times and how influential it is looked at times, just undeniably doomed. And we can see this statistically. The apex of a lot of, right-wing denominations was a while ago, and the things they have to do to maintain power, it's all desperate and it's all fleeting, and it might last a while longer and it might get worse. I don't know, but it's all doomed and fleeting. And like, when I say that, I am saying that religiously, because the Bible tells us over and over these things are doomed and fleeting. And the NCAA is, it feels like a joke to say the NCAA is a version of that same empire, but it is. It exploits bodies for the sake of money and power. And it's resistant to change because it feels better for the men in charge to maintain their positions than to share anything they have with, younger people, with people of color. And it's obviously, it isn't quite the same stakes as the Roman Empire versus Judea, or the same stakes as the United States government against trans people, but it's the same dynamic. So the NCAA is not the most sinister face of this doomed empire. It's the silliest face, but it's still a face of it,
And if I may throw in, and I think they just said, okay, we're going to let in the players from the 3 leagues in the Canadian Hockey League can now play college hockey, which was one that they had clung to for 40 years. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, it's almost, it reminds me kind of like late Soviet Union, like when they, this is glasnost on ice, like the guy who gets his players in the Ontario Hockey League, they're professional quality players. They just happen to be 20 years old, and now the NCAA is like saying, yeah, you can come. It's like, yeah, where was this when it might have, you were the ones who actually started this by barring them about 45 years ago or so. What I found out too is as you sort of have talked about, writing's rewriting. How did you work to really come up with these well-drawn characters, and what would you impart to a listener who wants to try to do this, write a work of fiction?
My characters are my favorite part because they are the part that had the most creative energy. Like, the setting was just depicted accurately, and just keep whittling more accurate, more honest. My characters are those are the things I actually invented, So I that's one part of it is, if character is to be a focus, it's got to be a focus. There's a deep thought. But for me, I guess it was helpful to have this established setting. I didn't have to come up with a planet with orange grass. It's just sort of just describe it exactly as it is and then populate it, For me, I think the main thing was I wanted each character to feel like they were the star of their own show, that they were actually animated when they were off camera. I do not like a story, whether it's a book or a movie or whatever, where the side characters feel like they power down when the camera's not off them. I don't like NPCs in books where it's just they only exist to impart wisdom to the protagonist. I wanted all of them to have an arc of their own to some extent, and all have things they want, things that have their own frictions and conflicts, and really that was it. Getting them to a point where honestly any of them could have been the protagonist, looking back. And, Sophie in particular, she was originally the main protagonist. Very first I had a two protagonist thing. And I think, if I am able to do more books, she'll emerge as the protagonist of the whole thing. But I think, one, treating them as if they are each their own person. Two, realizing and accepting that they're all just extensions of me. These are all just parts of my brain, even the ones that are antagonists or whatever, it would be ridiculous to describe any of these characters as anything other than, a version, a projection of me, Isaac's mother at times is super Republican, super conservative. Well, I know what it's like to be that. And I know, and I've sort of, when I'm writing her, I'm thinking about like, okay, what would it be like if I didn't have any sort of a moment that enabled me to step back and start questioning? What if instead I started having kids when I was like 18 or 19 and like just never had that chance to pull away, and just thought I had to keep doubling down on pushing kids further and further into that. And what if, I lost a spouse very early and, was the sole parent of multiple kids? And what if my church world had told me that I was the incorrect gender for this, right? She's a mother of 2 boys, and she's been told that women can't raise boys, especially not by themselves. So, like, I just tried to empathize with all of that. And as she emerges as a more complex character, she's also, at times, she's the author explaining why this book exists. At times she's just saying, like, too often old people do not go back. I say old person, I include myself there. Too often adults do not go back and examine our younger selves. And we look at young people, young kids these days, as if they're a whole other species. No, they are exactly like we were, in modern terms, they have phones. That's it. That's the only difference. We had phones. I had a phone as a kid. But, like, just to use mom as an example of, like, these characters are all me. I don't know, maybe it's just for some authors that's like that feels like a leap. And I guess maybe it's harder if, like, your villains are like mass murdering tyrants or something. I don't know. But
True. I did wonder too, like what influences helped you understand how characters are created, because you've mentioned video games, and I'm sure there's other, TV, other pieces of physical media that have helped you understand how good characters are drawn.
There are a lot of influences. Honestly, like, this sounds like really lo-fi, but pro wrestling is a great educator.
Great.
There's the character Josiah is a pro wrestling fan, because it was like this time period. Come on, one of these boys is a pro wrestling fan. It's unavoidable. Like, probably, honestly, most of them, but like I kept it to just him. But like the starkness, the clarity, the the how quickly can you establish this person's goals versus this person's goals, the economy of meaning and intention is just, and it's got it like the kind of storytelling that has to be crystal clear both on TV and to the person in the last row, and like the efficiency of it. And the Bible is also like that, because like there's a lot of like legendary Bible characters that everyone knows about, who they're in there for a chapter, right?
Yeah.
or like King Solomon. Everyone knows who King Solomon is. He has one quote in the whole Bible, one quote, and it's not even it's the cut the baby in half thing. That's not even actually him. That's just an ancient mythological trope that just applied to a lot of guys. And for all time, we think of King Solomon as the wisest man who ever lived, because a quote was he had like the Michael Scott quoting Wayne Gretzky thing. That's basically King Solomon's only recorded moment. So like that sense of like this person's first appearance, we need to understand him. Alexa takes the stage and she cusses her little heart out, and great, we understand Alexa just fine. But like, honestly, the number one influence, and I didn't realize this until I was putting together an annotated ebook that is available at shutdownfullbooks.com with like 160 pages of like notes and deleted scenes and like some kind of like sequel spinoff-y type stuff. I didn't really notice until I was putting that together that like how formative X-Men was for me.
Okay.
That like, which I don't know, looking back, it's like, duh. But I played a game with a reader and ended up including it in that annotated thing where it's like mapping each of my characters to an X-Man. And it was
nice.
Wow. It was like just across the board, like, oh, that's, yep. It was not difficult. It was not hard at all. And I had no idea, So yeah, it was a whole lot of stuff, but at the basic ground floor level, honestly, those might be the 3 main ones. And
yeah,
hey,
the wrestling part I did want to expand on. Like who was your wrestler? Like when you were younger.
My grandfather was a Ric Flair fan, so it was like, all right, Ric Flair. He was like torn between. There was like the Ric Flair Dusty Rhodes rivalry, where it's like,
okay,
It was like a rich guy versus working man, so he kind of bounced back and forth between those two. I was more of a rock fan than a Stone Cold fan around like Y2K. And then honestly, I mostly got out of it until like during the Becky Lynch era. She became a big wrestling fan and was like, okay, I'm back. We went to wrestle.
Yeah.
My kid.
No, you're not your kid. Sorry, yeah, there was a little cut out there.
And we ended up going to WrestleMania in Philly this year, which that was fun.
Oh, nice. Now I'm not. Now I kind of describe my own experience as wrestling adjacent because you can't have worked in sports media without being around a lot of people who liked wrestling. And I was always the kid like, it's not real. And meanwhile, like my sister would go to like WWF shows, and she would be like, come back and talk about how awesome it was. And I'm like, it's fake, Trina. Like I was that humorless scold. But now it's like I've come to appreciate the pageantry and the writing. And actually, I think it was about 2004. And now Chris Jericho's dad is Ted Irvine, who was a hockey player in the 60s and 70s. And I saw him give a talk to a room full of hockey players, and he told them, hockey's got to clean up his act, or soon wrestling will be the only sport with any integrity left. So it's like, okay, that's where Chris Jericho got it from his dad being a good awards dinner speaker. And then he did build this. This was right after the Todd Bertuzzi, Steve Moore incident. But yeah, that's I guess too. I wanted to ask too about the help. Of all the people who read the manuscript and offered notes. How do you talk people into making time to actually read your work in progress? Because everyone is so busy these days.
People are very nice. It was a variety of, sending it to friends, sending it to like journalism friends, writer friends, podcast listeners. I ended up, a few dozen people ended up giving me the time. And like so much of it was so valuable. Like I think back on my very first draft and it's like, oh man, I thought I'd really done something, but it was just a total mess. So yeah, it took a lot of people to help get it to what it is, and that was very gracious of them.
Yeah, and we should touch on before we sort of move into the last portion. There's a lot of ways people. You mentioned, of course, there's an annotated version coming out now, and also right off the hop. I mean, the pre-order was all about supporting the Trevor Project. Why was that, central to kind of, I guess, the mission with this novel?
So the Trevor Project, the charity whose aim is to protect young LGBTQ people, it was like, I don't know, I had this sense that this thing's going to make, an amount of money. Somebody's going to buy a copy. And I just had this feeling of like, it has already done enough for me. I want this first wave of money to go to someone else. And I really did not end up thinking twice about where it was going. I think back on my friends I grew up with who, during our adolescence, a number of them came out, and that was as you would expect within a very high control queerphobic world. It was very, very rough for a lot of them. And through the process of writing this, I realized like I've been angry about that my whole life, So that was one reason. And like, I look at like the 2024 Republican presidential campaign, which is ending with just an onslaught of transphobic ads. Someone put the number of $100 million worth of transphobic ads. And I'm like, yeah. If that doesn't, confirm that like, that LGBTQ people are still placed on the bottom of society, then, that's as clear as can be. And like my whether I believe in eternal life or whatever or not is nothing gets better until it gets better for the people that we've put on the bottom of society. And so I guess it's personal and it's part of something timeless,
Yeah, true. And we've had a situation here in Hamilton with an LGBTQ plus person, Beckett Noble, who died by suicide at Redeemer University, which is a private Christian university, just sort of on the outskirts of town. And there's review. There's supposed to be. I'm just saying this for the listeners mostly. but there's a review that's supposed to go on about their partnerships with the city, and it's been held up because we had this is like sounding like 2024 Mad Libs. The review is supposed to be, should the city be in partnership with a university that failed this student? And it's been held up because there was a ransomware attack, and it's kind of like, yeah, that's the reason for everything. That ransomware attack was in February. Yeah, and I guess that's true. I mean, at some point, the big theme in this novel is just that how these children are navigating what I think is Isaac describes as a facsimile world designed to consume the original. That made me think sometimes, yeah, the sports industry is a lot like that these days, is it not?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in a way, everything is like, one of the unique traits of evangelicalism, and there are not many that are unique, but one of the unique ones is how much it tries to just create its own version of everything, its own music industry and its own movie industry and all this stuff. Let's see, the sports corollary for that might be maybe the way that, like every stadium must be built by like a like public project, because every sports owner is going to invent the story that they're like this like civic father who, they're the Benjamin Franklin of whatever that town is, and they must be treated as if they are the government. It
is like that.
So I don't know, off the top of my head, that maybe there's something there as a corollary.
Yeah, and you also sort of have the, you've also got that people trying to use sports, like, whether they're politicians or that self-appointed civic father who's doing it with the people's money, and they're trying to use sports to gain influence as well. You see, there's a lot of that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Which, like, that is more like universal. Like, every institution, once it gets big enough, is going to try to stick its toe into everybody else's business, And I mean, we see in sports, like, it's weird. Like, the number of athletes who just haven't weighed in on an election this fraught, and the ones who are allowed to and the ones who are not allowed to, and like the billionaires in charge of it all, who it's just sort of understood that that they likely side with empire. And yeah, I mean, like sports and religion, like it's beyond hand in hand, in ways good and bad, in every way. It's like everything just flows into everything else, and like every institution will always, unless it is held in check in some way, will always just seek to become as big and as powerful as it can, and to profit the people at the top of it. College football is one example, just over and over and over. There's so many examples of college football becoming political, using religion for politics, using religion for football reasons, using religion for religion's sake, and all of those, or anything else.
And how does one as a fan sort of? I mean, you're as an individual, you can only do so much about. You probably really can't do anything about that. But how do you still get your enjoyment of the sport? I mean, because college football is the most fun form of football there is. I'll put that card on the table. Any day, any day. I mean, you were part of a site called Every Day Should Be Saturday, which I read unfaithfully for over 10 years. How does a fan, reconcile all that going on top of the game that they so enjoy? Is my question.
I view it the same way I review religion and everything else, is it does not belong to anyone. It does not belong to them. They do not get to claim it just because they put the most money into it. And I'm talking about a whole bunch of things all at once here, right? Just because they put their name on the building does not mean they own it. They do not own the enjoyment of it. They don't own the memories. They don't own the lessons. They don't own the highs. Like, no one actually owns any of these things that lots and lots of people care about, whether it's a team or a sport or a religious tradition or anything else. They might make the most money from it, and they might have a little business card that says they own it, but they don't actually, because like anything that draws people into a building to care together is owned by all those people, and they decide what level of control that thing and they have on each other. So like, you know, I my favorite team, the Atlanta Falcons, I wildly disagree with its owner on, you know, for instance, he wanted Deshaun Watson to be the quarterback of the Atlanta Falcons.
Ugh.
I wildly disagree with him on that. That's disgusting. And I don't know. I've been a fan of the team longer than he's owned it. It's not his. I don't care. like you know, he doesn't get to decide how I feel about this team. You know, religion is the same way. Yeah, a whole lot of people use it for very bad reasons. Okay, you know, there is nothing that they have actually monopolized about it. So I guess for me, it's just sort of just a shrug, like, you know, bad person, you say this is yours. Well, LOL, no, it's not.
Yeah, how in line is that with what Roger Ebert used to say? He's like I think he used to say the Chicago Sun-Times is my newspaper, but even if Robert Murdoch owns it.
Sure. I mean, yeah, that's a very valid example.
Yeah, and I've applied that. I mean, I'm wearing a Toronto Blue Jays hat right now, and I'm always like, yeah, you know, they're owned by the biggest teleconglomerate in Canada, but it's just like, yeah, but they're my team. Like, I mean, I cheered for the Blue Jays before anyone had ever heard of a company called Rogers Communications, like when I think it was still called Cantel back then. And the only person who had a cell phone was my dad, because he was a contractor. And it was like one where there weren't even cell phone towers yet in Canada, so all his calls would get routed through Rochester, New York.
Yeah, Blue Jays owner.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, my dad is the owner of the Blue Jays, even if he hasn't been to a game in 3 years. But yeah, that's interesting too. And I also wondered, so when with college football, when was the first time you felt like a true connection to it, going all the way back to early life?
I think the first football game I went to was a Clemson Georgia Tech game. And Clemson, I know at that age, I was walking. We're from Atlanta, so I was walking up, and you know, among the home fans, and there was this person with tiger paint all over their face, screaming in my face, and I was like, I don't know, 4 or something. That's a memory. There was, and then when I was, again, very small, Georgia Tech, the hometown team, won a claim to a national title. I was like, wow, the home team, they must be really great. I better go all in on this sport. That was a bad idea. But, you know, it's just growing up in a part of the world that's very passionate about it. It's, you know, in some ways it's kind of like not even an option. You're just going to be. So yeah, and you know, I went to a college, didn't have football. Now we have football. We just got to enjoy the biggest win in school history, defeating undefeated Liberty University at home for our first FBS win. So in some ways, it's like anywhere between those two events, getting yelled at by a Clemson fan and beating Liberty last week.
And I have a close friend who podcasts on his own, and I know one of his few touchstones with college football is the Clemson South Carolina rivalry, and why it's, you know, socially and legally acceptable to, you know, tie a stuffed tiger to the bumper of your truck for that week in late November. And actually, Jason, you're the second guest we've had in the last few months for the Georgia Tech Tigers. We had Jerry Grillo on, and he works at Georgia Tech and has covered SEC football. That's too, like I say, so it's basically a matter of, as you were saying, just I find out how I'm going to have fun with this, and I guess how was that always a thought that was present way back when, you know, Shutdown Fullcast got going? I think you guys have been at it now, the podcast itself for 11 years now.
Something
and I'm
like
always
that.
amazed by it. I was like, these are the 4 or 5 of the most best conversationalists in North America's, you know, for what my opinion is worth.
Yeah, I mean, that show is like, it started as just, hey, we want to say some really dumb shit, so we're just going to record it and post it. And people were listening. Obviously, Spencer had a significant platform already. I was just an editor at the same company. And, you know, I don't know. We've all along given ourselves the freedom to go as far off topic as we want. To just stop covering the sport for months if we want. Like, it's, I think, a show more informed by the spirit of college football than actual college football. Because, like, to me, college football, that's something that happens everywhere at all hours. It's still going at 2 a.m. Some 18-year-old has completely forgotten out how to tackle, and it's created the best memory in, like, the history of a school in, Sacramento or whatever. It's a sport with, I think, the perfect midpoint between incompetence and investment, right? It's like, sure, the NFL is great. The NFL is big and wonderful and good. And all pro sports leagues, okay, great. They got the best of the best. That's great. That's good. So that's one extreme. And then on the other, you could watch like high school sports or whatever, and it's like, wow, almost there's only one truly talented player on the field. Everyone else is just sort of bumping into each other. Now let's find a midpoint between those two, right? Where we have some elite athletes and some just a person athletes. And let's pump in like well over 100 years of like family lore, of neighbor against neighbor, and let's make it happen in the middle of nowhere. And like the spirit of all this is just silly, just very, very silly, but silly in a deeply serious way. And I guess we just sort of applied that spirit to everything, like people always send us like, hey, this news story of, I don't know, someone heisted a grocery store or, whatever, the video game, malfunction in a hilarious way. Or, people send us like, this is a Fullcast story. Nothing to do with football at all. So we've just sort of decided all of life is college football, I guess.
Yeah. I think there was an episode, I don't know how long ago it was just where you read news stories and it was like, did this happen in Alabama or did this happen in England? And it was just kind of like, I'm like, well, as a Canadian of Scottish descent, it's just like, I'm like rubbing my palms like, okay, let's hear it,
Yeah. I mean, everywhere is Alabama is a thesis that I think I have come around to. Like some places have tall buildings and therefore they think they're not Alabama, but they're Alabama.
Yeah, and I live in a what is basically a speculator city where lots of real estate is held and hoarded, and so we always talk about Hamilton. Wait till you see the weird part, or wait till you see the rundown part, because it can change from street to street. And a friend and I, same friend who podcast, who always just tried. What did you see today? What did I see today? But I was always like, you have a handicap because you are a city bus driver, so you see everything. Now, I did sort of want to ask, just as we sort of wind down, now, how did was it just a local thing that led you to the Atlanta Falcons back in the day?
Yeah. I was born in Atlanta, so I was stuck with that team. And
yeah. Well, I obviously, as a Minnesota Vikings, I have to ask, like, how did you experience the whole Gary Anderson, Morton Anderson thing in 1999? Probably differently than I received it.
Yeah, it was great. I think I was like on a date or something. It was very, very early in my dating history. We just were like, we need to watch this game. Like, it was like I was like out of sports kind of at a while. Like I hadn't paid much attention to football for a few years, but it was like, yeah. And it ended up being a bunch of friends watching that game together, and it was a positive experience. Just being shocked to discover we're allowed to go to the Super Bowl. So.
Well, and for me, it was the complete. Well, first I went to watch it at someone's house who was a fellow Vikings fan, and then it was just like after it ended, he was just like, "Guys, I need to be alone," and I was like, "Okay, fine," because I had to go cover a hockey game, and I'm still wearing my Randy Moss jersey. So as far as and I just have a couple more things to ask Jason, and this has been fantastic. I hope we've had a consistent through line through all this, but. I just wanted to ask, how do you sort of explain what's going on this year with college football, and specifically the expansion to a 12-team playoff? It's going to be a couple months before that happens. What are you sort of looking forward to seeing how it plays out in real time come around the 20th of December?
It has changed the dynamic of the whole season, and I think a lot of people took that to one extreme or another before we entered this season. A lot of people approach the season with the idea that like, oh, the big regular season games just won't matter anymore. And, I mean, we all saw Georgia, Alabama. We're going to see Ohio State, Penn State this weekend. It's clear the big games still matter. They don't matter in the same way. But there's a trade-off, for any meaning that no longer applies to Oregon, Ohio State. That meaning has now slid over to Boise State, UNLV, to like the smaller school games, because like those now have national championship implications. So like, I just view it as sort of a trade-off. Like is this the postseason structure that I would choose if I was in charge? No, but I'm not going to say it's all bad or it makes things worse. It just makes things different. It is like, ultimately, if we have to say we have to risk like something as sacred as Michigan, Ohio State being sullied by having a rematch, like, okay, that would be bad. But when we accept that cost, the benefit is, wow, like Army gets to play in meaningful games for the first time in 80 years, like all these schools that have just been forgotten and don't matter, suddenly they matter, and like, I think on the whole that feels better than what we had over the past few years, over the 14 playoff era. It's not as messy as I would prefer college football to be, but Boise State UNLV has national implications. I'll take it.
Yeah, I never had a problem with code. I'm a sort of convenient Michigan fan, so obviously I don't have problems with split national championships. Dan Jenkins used to say, "Yeah, 3 schools can print bumper stickers instead of 1. Great, great for the bumper sticker industry." So, just for a casual, audience, what is the significance of, say, an 11-win or 12-win Indiana team? What does that mean? In the simplest terms.
It's been the biggest pleasant surprise of the season. They're currently 8-0. They haven't been 8-0 since 1967. This was the nobody of the Big Ten Conference, the opposite of Ohio State. And to this point, I would argue they have played better than Ohio State. They're not ranked up where Ohio State is because they don't have the same logo. They haven't played as many tough opponents, but they're just destroying people. It's just delightful. A few years ago, a T-shirt company that we're friends with, Home Field Apparel, that they set the goal of 9-win Indiana. They've since grown to far more than just a T-shirt company, and meanwhile, Indiana is going to breeze past 9 wins. Indiana was set this year to I think 5.5 wins was their Vegas over/under, and they're on pace to double that just in the regular season alone.
And I have to throw in that the quarterback is from Oakville, Ontario, which is 20 minutes away from me. So
there we go.
Curtis Rourke and his brother Nathan is the backup for the BC Lions, by the way, going into the playoffs. And just one sort of specific question on college football. I mean, the 5 through 8 seeds get to host on campus. So who do we need to see in there to up our chances of getting like a snow globe type of game?
I mean, Notre Dame is going to be in position to host one of those like quite regularly. They're not eligible for a top 4 seed because they're not in the conference. Team. So we're going to see a lot of South Bend, Indiana, I think, in the new playoff era. And it can snow there. Doesn't feel very likely we'll get Wisconsin or Minnesota, or definitely not Buffalo anytime soon. Michigan probably not this year. Ohio State might be a little too good to host one, but Ohio State or Penn State could host one. So Oregon probably a little bit too good this year, but they'll be within that range most years. I think there's a good chance we're going to get some snow home games.
Yeah, I mean, hey, everyone loves a snow game because usually it just means the defense can't pass rush and the quarterback might throw it for 400 yards, and because the receivers are the only ones who know where to cut and where to run. And I was just sort of hopeful too that, Jason, if you had any questions about Canadian university football, because occasionally the full cast will dip into it, ask away, because you're talking to someone who's voted in the media top 10 for 15 years.
Nice. Can you give me one school that I should take back and we should share with a school whose lore, vibe, whatever it might be, like which school would you share with the Fullcast universe, knowing that these people are the way they are?
Well, I'm going to have to just go with my alma mater. The Queen's Gaels are the only, they're a truly Scottish Canadian university football team. I mean, they are called the Gaels. No one really knows what it means. It just means someone just hung it on them because, oh, you're a university with a lot of Scots. Because way back when, Queen's was basically created to train priests, and then it became an engineering school. And if you've ever heard Craig Ferguson talk about Glasgow, like basically Kingston is a little Glasgow, but it's also a little Boston because it's a hub city, sort of surrounded by Lake Ontario on one side, Americans on the other, lots of prisons and the Canadian Shield. So Queens became this place where, and I've sort of thought of trying to write about this, where football is just basically one rivalry to me. It's one side that wants to marshal and control all the resources, and it's one that's just like, let's just work with what we've got and see what happens. Like we'll run the wing T, or we'll run apparently one year in the 80s, Queens ran a defense. As you know, Canadian football's a 12-a-side game. Mm-hmm. And so Queens decided, let's run a defense with 6 linemen, 5 linebackers, and 1 safety, and just play that way, and just to confuse people. And basically, they won't know where and of course, I actually went there when they were in a lean period and couldn't beat anybody basically, except the really bad teams. And I've been there when they've won 2 national championships. They don't win all the time. And maybe I'll email you the link afterwards. Last weekend, they were in their playoff game down at Windsor, and they ended up having to put in the third quarterback who'd only thrown 1 pass in the regular season. And it comes down to 16 seconds left in the game, defensively dominated game where neither team's moved the ball. And he airs it out like a 40-yard touchdown to a rookie wide receiver in double coverage, and the kid catches it for the winning touchdown. And then he does a front flip to celebrate. So I'm going to say Queens because I went there, but the other one I'll throw out that, not taking my personal bias out, is a team called the Bishops Gators in Lennoxville, Quebec, which is down about 2 hours southeast of Montreal. It's an English university in a town of about 6,000 people. They wear purple and silver. They're the only Quebec school that plays in the Atlantic Conference because they're so small. And this year, they are undefeated. They haven't won a conference championship in 30 years, but if they get through the conference playoffs that start this weekend, they get to host a national semifinal, and who knows what could happen. I mean, they're always just a mix of kids from kind of like New England and the Maritimes and Southeast Ontario, and it's kind of like, you want to like go to a big high school that has a golf course on it for 4 years and party? Well, come to Bishops. And they have the nicest shade of purple I have ever seen. And again, say that as a Vikings fan. So Queens and Bishops, take that to they used to be in the same conference, but not anymore. So either the Gaels or the Gators.
Queens and Bishops, call it a chessboard.
Yeah, exactly, with an apostrophe in it. Well, Jason, this has been great. I just want to give you one last opportunity. What's sort of next with the Hell is a World Without You universe or franchise, as it were, and we'll close out.
It's available paperback, hardcover, ebook, audiobook, wherever, including your library, probably, if you bother them enough, at least. And the version is at shutdownfullbooks.com.
Yeah, and I'm going to bother those libraries again about stocking it just to make sure. Well, thank you so much for this, and best of luck with everything. I know best of luck with all the Shutdown episodes for the rest of the season. And thank you so much for your time today, Jason Kirk, and your thoughtfulness and what you've done for so many readers.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nate. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.